Hey friends, I'm Maxwell Freud, a queer Minneapolis-based board game designer and the host of Hatch This Way, a limited audio series where I chat with other queer folks in the tabletop industry to learn about who they are and how they contribute to the hobby by being their authentic selves. And today I am chatting with Leona Neelam Maple. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to meet you and learn all about you. So to that end, you have a bunch of really fun identifiers in your Twitter bio. Do you want to walk me through how you identify and what all those things mean? And we'll just start breaking it down.
For sure. So my name is Leona Neelam Maple. You can find me on Twitter at the Leona Maple, speaking of my Twitter bio. And I am a woman. I'm South Asian. I was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada as a South Asian woman. And so that's who I am. And I use she, her pronouns. I identify as queer, I identify as pansexual, and I identify as demisexual, to kind of cover the whole spectrum. And then outside of that, I do a bunch of stuff within the tabletop RPG community, but I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later.
Perfect. I just talked to someone who is demi. So why for you is it important to have both of those? What are your definitions of those terms?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. So for me, and I'll start this way. I use queer as a reclamation. A lot of people are like, oh, queer's a bad word. Well, it once was. I feel that queer is a word that is being reclaimed, and so I like using that word. It's also just a shorthand because sometimes it's a lot to be like, hi, I'm pansexual and demisexual, and da 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 da. So sometimes I'm just like, hi, I'm queer, and everyone's like, all right, cool, she's here, So that's kind of where the queer kind of stems from, and also to kind of like make room for the fact that like, it's never very clear, I use she, her pronouns, but I could very comfortably use she, they pronouns if I wanted to. So for me, the queer label kind of just gives room for that. Who knows, things may shift aspect of things. Pansexual is almost from a lot of different conversations that I've had. I understand it as like a further extension of bisexual. A lot of times when I'm talking to bisexual folks, they're like, no, like bisexual came first and then pansexual. And pansexual means to be attracted to anyone. And for me, all that means is that I am never like attracted. How some people are like, oh, you have a type, like, oh, you're always attracted to this type of person. I don't have a type. I'm attracted to anyone. I don't care what your body size is. I don't care what your skin color is. There's very few things where I'm like, oh, I'm specifically attracted to this thing. Like, I find everybody very beautiful, and I think when I am romantically or sexually attracted to someone, it has nothing to do with their body. It has more to do with them as a person. So I find myself open to everyone of any gender identity, whether they consider themselves straight, trans, gender queer, gender non-binary, gender fluid, whatever. So for me, pansexual feels like it just says, hey, I love everyone just as they are. So that's why I identify as pansexual. I'm going to dive into this a little bit later, but I'm going to say there's kind of like three different aspects. And when we start talking about being demisexual, we get into the area of asexuality and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I'm bringing this in now, because it kind of starts to play into that. A lot of people don't really realize this, but you can kind of divide up, if you really think long and hard about it, because goodness gracious, have I thought long and hard about it. You can kind of divide up the way our attraction and sexual and romantic nature works into kind of like three different areas. I call them drive, desire, and attraction. And there may be some arguing to do about like desire and attraction kind of being very similar, but I kind of tend to break them down like that. So for me, I also, sex and romance are two different things. So I consider myself both pansexual and panromantic. I don't feel like I can only be romantic towards one gender or two genders or anything like that. So I'm attracted to anyone romantically and sexually. Demisexual, I came to along the way because I'm 26 and in my early 26, about to turn 27 actually. So by the time this comes out, I'll probably be 27. And in my early 20s, I it was like, oh, everyone's on Tinder, everyone's on Tinder, going on Tinder dates, hooking up, blah, 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 blah. And I was too. And it was not good. I think there's a lot to be said about sex and sex education, how important it is to know that sex is meant to be pleasurable and you're supposed to feel good about yourself. But even when like all the right things were done, I wouldn't feel good about myself when I was hooking up. And it kind of sent me on this deeper journey of like, well, what's up? Something isn't quite right. Like why is it that, something doesn't feel quite right? Why is it that like if I'm hooking up or I'm having a one night stand, I kind of walk away feeling really, really like sick to my stomach and like just not whole anymore. Like I felt very uncomfortable in my body and it just didn't feel right. And so that kind of combined with the fact that like if there was somebody that I was really, really into, I loved them very deeply. And there was no in between. If I was sexually intimate with someone, I love them. And I was like, this is kind of weird. This isn't normal. I feel like, most people that are like in their 20s can probably, go to the club, get super drunk, and if they find a pretty person, they bring them home, they have a great time. Sure, whatever, and that's not how I work. So that kind of led me to do all of this kind of digging. And I realized that I'm demisexual. And to me, what that means is I cannot be, well, I mean, I can. I physically can. I absolutely could. The human body does what the human body does. But I, as a human being and as a human person, um, do not feel comfortable engaging in sexual intimacy unless I have an emotional intimacy with the person. That becomes very important. Without that, there is no feeling good. Without that, there is no joy or pleasure or any of that. It's very, very important for me to have an emotional connection, because even in situations where I'm just like, oh, this is a friend, I feel like I have a friendship connection with them. I feel like we're kind of close, and then I become physically intimate with them. I realize afterwards that I tend to feel very, very deeply emotionally connected to that person. And even if they don't reciprocate that, but it's something that happens on my end. And physical intimacy as an act is deeply emotional for me. When I'm having sex, I'm feeling very strong emotions. So all of these kind of things tied together is kind of what makes up my demisexuality. I very, very much cannot have sex unless I really trust the person, because otherwise it's heartbreak. It's heartbreak. It's heart wrenching. It's uncomfortable. It can really, and the reason why I'm going into so much detail about this is because the number of times I've had people come up to me and go, well, that just sounds like common decency. You want to know who you're jumping in bed with. And yes, I suppose there is an element of common decency to it, but there's also a huge level of things that aren't just common decency that tend to come up in my love life. It's never simple for me to love and care for someone, because I have to be very mindful of how I'm going to react to that. I had to explain for like 5 minutes here what I'm doing. Yeah. And I guess the other side of it, and this isn't necessarily true of everyone on the asexual spectrum, demisexual people, asexual people, all across the spectrum experience this in many different ways. But and this is why I mentioned like the drive, desire, blah 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 blah, was because if I'm in a relationship and I feel very comfortable, I have a very high sex drive. If I'm not in a relationship and there is no comfortable, safe, emotionally fulfilling sex easily available to me, give it about a month and my sex drive will just kind of take a nap. Like, I think, it just goes away. It's like every now and again, I'm just like, oh, it'd be nice if I had somebody that I could, snuggle with and maybe be physically intimate with. But other than the occasional little, oh, I wish I had this and I feel kind of lonely, it kind of just, it goes to sleep. It doesn't worry. It's like, it's fine. You don't need to worry about this right now. But when I'm in a relationship, my sexual intimacy becomes a very important part of that relationship. And when I'm lacking in that, I feel like, I'm not being a good partner to my partners, or I miss that, I'm like, well, why aren't we doing this? And it's like, oh, is there something wrong? Or, have we just not had the time to spend time with each other? Things like that. So it becomes this thing that kind of pivots depending on the situation as well, which can be kind of weird. So that's kind of why I mentioned like the drive versus desire. I always have sexual desire. I would always love to have it, but it goes to sleep sometimes, and sometimes it's very awake. And I'm attracted to everybody, so that's always just there, you know. And the same thing can be said of romance. I always want to be romantic. The drive and the desire is always there, as is the attraction. But I mean, if I'm not in a romantic relationship, then I guess I'm not romantic, right? So that's a very long-winded breakdown, but hopefully that's something that makes sense in a very circular way.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And I think just to like give people maybe some perspective on that, like you mentioned like the people saying, oh, that's common decency. Like I disagree. Like some people some people don't get emotionally attached, like, and some people really enjoy the non-emotional attachment aspect of hooking up, and that's fine. Like, I don't think
more power to you. I envy those people some days. I'm like, gosh, I wish I were you. But you know, at the same time, there have been many times when I've had this conversation of, hi, I'm demisexual and this is what this means, and people go, well, that's just common decency, you just seem like a nice person. And I'm like, that's not what's going on here. Trust me. It's a lot harder on my emotions than that, I assure you.
Yeah, it's not like a choice like you're pursuing. This is how I feel and I can't turn it off, you know.
Yes. Yeah. I don't get a choice in this matter. You know, if the other person doesn't reciprocate, you know, then I'm just kind of on my own feeling all of these things, and it's not reciprocated. And, you know, it's, you know, that can end up being a really unfun time because, oh, you know, well, we were supposed to only be friends. Well, yeah, you know, but that didn't end well, you know? So I've definitely had those types of situations, even recently, you know, where it was like, oh, you know, we're just friends. And I'm just like, yeah, we're not just friends anymore. I feel very strongly about you. And so long as you're aware of that and you're okay with that, then cool, you know?
Yeah, it's very, like, for someone like me, and I think this is very common in like gay community, is that I've been involved with a lot of my friends and we don't like, that's somewhat normal. Like, there's not a lot of us, and we still see each other in public and we get along. But you know, there's no pressure to like be romantic, and like sometimes you try stuff, it doesn't work out. And it's very, very, gay world is very small and
it is, you know, and
complicated and
I
messy.
think that comes, I think that comes with that feeling of safety and solidarity, right? When you know someone else gets it, you're immediately drawn to them to want to have that connection. Whereas for me, I absolutely identify with all of that and would absolutely do that, but I make sure that the person that I'm with will understand that I am going to carry a lot of love for them for a long time. They don't necessarily need to act on it, but I'm going to very much care for them, you know, and I will want to see that reciprocated as a friendship at the bare minimum, you know. And if I'm not feeling loved, then it becomes very hard for me to keep seeing that person like that, because it's love and sex. I think the simplest way to explain it is that love and sex are very deeply intertwined for me, and I cannot divorce them. You know, I've tried and I've tried, and they cannot be ripped apart. They are stuck together like glue for me, and they are tangled up in a knot. And so if I try to not love someone that I'm sexually intimate with, that's not going to go well. You know, even if it's like agreed from the get-go, it's not going to happen. It does not quite work that way. And I need to know stuff about the person that I'm going to be with. And I need to know more than just their name. I need to know, you know, I fall in love with people through conversation. You know, I want to get to know them as a person and what their values are and what makes them laugh and what makes them cry. And it's through those kinds of conversations where I really get to know, like, especially what people are passionate about, I find is the biggest thing for me. Like, tell me what you're passionate about and I will absolutely admire you, even if it's just as a friend. But especially when it comes to relationships and stuff, this is the kind of stuff that I have to like think about, because if I'm talking to someone and these are the kinds of conversations that are happening where, I'm meeting someone and they're very passionate about something and I'm getting to learn that about them, well, shucks, I might start to feel very attracted to them. And then I have to kind of pace myself and be like, all right, hold on, is this a good idea? Because this is a lot. This is a lot to give to throw at a person and be like, hi, I'm going to be very emotional towards you, like it's tricky.
Gays, especially if you told a gay you're gonna be emotional towards them, they'd be like, this isn't gonna work. we gotta call it off now.
Yeah, no, that just sends the gays running.
Oh God, look at us stereotyping. That's what this podcast is for. So what? No, yeah. It's we can say it. You can't.
Yes, we're making the jokes because we are the gay peoples.
I am the problem. So what was it like learning that, or like growing up and finding like that journey of discovery for you?
Oh goodness, it was a whole thing. I honestly, for the life of me, think I figured out that I was demisexual before I figured out that I was pansexual and queer. I think I realized very early on that I didn't quite function the same way, and that there was sex and intimacy would stir up a lot of different stuff in me, and that I would have kind of these experiences that were maybe not quite the norm. So I think I figured that out through research and conversation, just talking to other queer folks or asexual folks, and just Google, lots of Google. And yeah, I think it was just a lot of conversations, and eventually I kind of realized, oh, it's not normal to think that way about girls. Oh, it's not normal to think this way about, it's that classic queer awakening kind of thing where it was just like, oh, you mean not everybody looks at that person and thinks that way? Oh dear. Oh, you mean it's not normal for two girls to just hang out and do stuff like that? No. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. I've been doing things and didn't even realize, but kind of like having to sift through all of that kind of like queer denial that I think can happen in a lot of like coming out stories, where it's like you have to shove through all the denial first and kind of get past all that and go, no, it's actually okay. Like you are absolutely okay just as you are. You are just, you are a queer person, and that's okay. And then kind of more Googling and shifting through the labels, and oh, am I this, oh, am I that, and trying on different labels. I tried on some for a while and I was like, yeah, okay, and then I tried some other ones. I was like, yeah, this feels really good. And you kind of just muddle your way through it, and you keep trying things out until you kind of find the one that feels like the best fit. And so for me, pansexual eventually became that best fit. The pansexual demisexual kind of like connection of the two just felt like the best way to kind of try and condense all of this stuff into the fewest words possible.
What about your family life growing up? So, like, give me some context about what it was like. Did you have any like pressures growing up to be a certain way, or what was that like for you? Because I mean, you're a woman of color. You have a very different experience growing up than I did, and I had pressures from like, this is your like, this could be your girlfriend. My mother still tries to set me up with women.
Oh no!
And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Like, she can't shut it off. Yes. Talk to me about your experience growing up.
For sure. Hey, there is a label that I completely forgot about. Technically, I also identify as polyamorous, which is just to say that if I find that I feel emotionally romantic towards multiple people, then I do. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But it's, for me, it's more about being open to the fact that love can occur in many different forms, is the shortest condensed version of that. But and thinking about family kind of helped remind me of that, because of the number of conversations I've had with my mother to try and get her to understand me as a person. But being South Asian, I've grown up in a very traditional household. I'm a first generation Indo-Canadian. So my family immigrated from Africa, actually. They are my my ancestors immigrated to Africa, to Kenya and Zimbabwe and places like that. And then there was a South Asian community that happened to grow up there. And then my family, after my mom and dad married, decided to immigrate to Canada. So they immigrated here, and then I was born here in Canada. So that's how that all worked. But in that sense, I think because I'm first generation, we still hold a lot of our traditions. I think something that has played out over the course of my life a lot is kind of this friction of, my parents are immigrants, my grandparents are immigrants. They hold on to their traditions very deeply, and I have been born and brought up and schooled and educated in a very Western society and in a very Western culture. And so for my entire life, I felt like I've had, one foot in one culture and one foot in the other. I'm half and half. And I can be quite traditional. I do hold my traditions very, very close to me, and I still value them deeply. They're still a very, very important part of who I am. And my Hindu religious festivals are still very important to me. But, to go from a very patriarchal society into, kind of as I hit university and started taking like gender studies and women's studies and meeting up with other LGBTQ folks and just not even realizing I was queer at the time, but just feeling very like a kinship towards these people, and just like, oh, this is nice. We watched But I'm a Cheerleader. That was a fun movie. I really enjoyed that. That was a great time. Had no clue. But it was interesting, kind of like coming from that culture and having to like shift through all of that, and to then kind of become a very feminist person. I identify as an intersectional feminist, and to kind of start to have to really like wrestle with that, even within the LGBTQ communities here. It's hard because I feel like I don't see a lot of people of color. So as soon as I do meet queer people of color, especially queer South Asians, I made my first queer South Asian friend like this past year. And so her and I get together for coffee, and it is just the best thing in the world. Like, it's just, it's so validating. But I never really quite had that level of someone who gets it, so even to this day, it's like I still struggle to find it and seek it out. But I'm not out to my family, despite the fact that I use my legal name on a bunch of stuff that says very loudly that I am many, many things that my family does not know. I am not out to my family. I am out to my mother, is the best way to put it. And my mother is the only person that I felt safe coming out to and just being like, hey, just so you know, like, I'm demisexual. Like, I don't plan on having sex with strangers. I'm more likely to stay at home and do it myself, like I just, Mom, I just need you to know this about me. And I need you to know that I am interested in everyone. And I may bring home a husband, I may bring home a wife, I may bring home a something else, or someone else, and whoever they are and whatever they are, I love them as they are, and I need you to know that. And maybe it'll be more than one person if it really feels like that's necessary for me, and it's tough because, well, first of all, I'm very glad that I have my mother. I think my mother realized very quickly that if she isn't open to learning and coming along for the journey, she's going to have no choice but to be left behind, because I'm not going to try and stuff myself down just to appease my family and my cultural expectations. I would rather be someone who is queer and doing things so that the next generation can go, oh yeah, there's someone like me, even if it's not the most loud or obvious. I know that there was one gay South Asian man in my community, and it was a thing that was not talked about, but it was very much understood and known that this just is, and so if I can take that one step further and be someone who is just openly accepted and loved in her community for all of her contributions while still being gay and not being like ousted from the community, then that's important, that's a step of progress. And then the person who comes after me can maybe do something more. So it's tough because I'm never quite sure how to make that balance. But the fact that my mother was kind of willing to learn, and it takes her a long time. She's still learning why we put pronouns in email signatures and why that's important, or why asking about people's pronouns are important. But she asks, and she is willing to set aside her discomfort and her motherly denial for a little bit and listen and ask questions. And then eventually she goes, okay, I think that's enough for my brain for today. And we just go back to being mother and daughter. And she'll kind of take her time and process on it, and maybe she denies it the rest of the time and pretends none of this exists. But I know at the end of the day that if I went to my mother and I said, hey, this is what's going on, I think she would want to support me, and she would want to figure out how to best balance and manage that without, putting me in danger with the rest of my family, who will not see eye to eye, most likely, or without putting me in danger of being ousted from the community. Because I think her and I both understand that these are all things that are important to me, and I get challenged on that perspective a lot sometimes, because a lot of times people are like, well, why not just live for yourself? But I come from a culture where doing things for your community and for your family and living for more than just yourself and your own needs is important. So, and I've just grown up doing so much for my community, and I would lose a part of myself if I stopped doing that. It would be a real shame. So yeah, I hope that it works out, and I'm never quite sure how it's going to work out.
One of the things that I'm kind of interested in figuring out, or putting some, maybe like naming, is like, what are some of the things that are preventing you? Like, how do you know it would be a struggle for you to come out to your family? Like, what has been said, or what are the signals? Like, what are the indicators that this is not going to be super smooth sailing?
For sure. I think there's a lot of like stigma and misunderstanding. I think there's a lot of very old-fashioned beliefs, and while we haven't necessarily talked about like LGBTQ rights in my household, it shows, when you talk about, for example, Indigenous issues, and your family members are not very well educated and willing to educate themselves on Indigenous rights issues. Well, what's the chance that they're going to do the same? I think the most explicit examples come from my grandparents, who are, in their 70s and 80s. And I remember 3 weeks after my 16th birthday, my grandfather, he's a wonderful man, and I love him for all that he is, but I don't know how much I'd be able to push him on this matter in particular. Because he sat me down, he gave me this little beautiful typed out handout, and it explained expectations for marriage, and to him it was, don't date divorcees, don't marry divorcees, don't date people with children, don't marry. I was 3 weeks of being 16, Grandpa. Like, Jesus Christ. Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to be swearing on this podcast, but
You can believe
but
that.
but like, goodness gracious, like, I was 3 weeks of 16 and I'm being told this stuff, and none of the boys in my household. I have one younger brother who has just turned 17, and I have two other cousins who are like my immediate brothers, and they didn't get that kind of talk from my grandfather either. So it was very much because I was a girl, and I am very much reminded in conversations with my grandfather that it is important for me to have a job and a career where I can continue to come home and raise my children and cook and things like that. So those very kind of heteronormative patriarchal norms are still very much at play and ingrained. And I got zero problems with coming home and cooking and cleaning for my kids. That sounds like a lovely future. But there's a difference between me wanting that for myself and someone telling me that I must do that. It's a puzzle. I know for a fact that my grandmother once said, "Oh, girls need to learn to cook and clean," and my father turned to her and said, "Yes, boys too." But where's that line? It's never been made clear. I don't know And to be very transparent, my father and I don't get along, so it's not a conversation that I would want to have
Mm.
with him anymore, anyways. But where's that line? If my father understands that boys also need to learn household chores and responsibilities, is that why is that? Is it just because he feels that there needs to be equal contribution? Well, okay, maybe he's unlearning some gender role stuff and some gender norm stuff, but is that necessarily going to translate to me being LGBTQ? Is that going to, if I bring home a female presenting person and say, this is my partner, I don't know how well that's going to go over. It still might not be accepted, So it's always this kind of dance of like reading between the lines and looking at the conversations that are happening and like trying to figure out it's almost like you're trying to read minds and you can't, but you're constantly looking for any kind of indicator that would indicate that showing more of yourself here will be detrimental to your own survival.
Yeah, I think like what I want people to understand if you're listening is like it's not necessarily that anyone ever, well, in my case, they did set me down and be like, if you turn gay, like I'll break my heart. But like we don't always get
Yeah.
like it's not always direct. It's these like
Yeah.
expectations that are like my
Mm-hmm.
grandpa since I was, oh God, I don't know, a little child, he'd be like, "Oh, do you have a girlfriend?" And I'd be like,
Yay,
"No."
yay, yay. It's so
And he'd be
many of
like,
these little
"Well, stay
cultural
away
things.
from them. They're
Yeah.
trouble." And I said, "Okay."
So you stayed really away from them.
I exceeded all of his expectations, but
You went too far in the other direction.
I know. I listened so well. I listened so well.
You did such a good job listening. It was so, but
But
yeah, and that's
even
just
little
it.
things like that, like
Mhm.
it seems harmless. Like he's telling a joke, and for most het people, like that's fine. But for
Mhm.
me, that harmless comment, like I never came out to him.
Mm-mm.
Um, I
No.
don't know how I have to assume now that he would have loved me regardless. I don't think it would have been an issue. My
Mhm.
grandma's been like surprisingly supportive.
Mm.
Um, and is like, well, I guess I'll never know. Like it didn't come up naturally, but
Mhm.
it's one of those things like I would still be extremely hesitant for him to find out because I feel like it just in passing and joking, you never gave me an alternative. Like it was never,
Mhm.
do you have a partner? Not that he would have that language, but
Yeah.
he never told me that it would be safe to be anything other than hetero in
Yeah.
front of him.
Yeah.
I guess,
Yeah.
you know,
Absolutely. It's very much, it's for people that are listening that may not have ever had a lived experience like this, it's like you've got a constant radar and you're constantly listening to the conversations going on to figure out the little minute details. Did they say, oh, it's okay to, if you're not, they didn't, okay, well, I guess maybe they're not open to it. It's all of these little things that you've never had to think about, that suddenly feels like life or death depends on them sometimes, and your physical safety might depend on them, or the roof over your head might depend on them. And it's just little conversational things. Oh, this little boy and girl playing together. Oh, so cute. They love each other. Well, why can't the two girls playing together also love each other? And that's why there's so many things in life that then become important. Saying partner instead of oh, boyfriend or girlfriend becomes important because it's neutral. It leaves room for that. Oh, showing you know different types of relationships is important because it says that that's okay. you know the fact that there was never a conversation in my household about LGBTQ rights, even when it was on the news. I remember sitting at the kitchen table and then the television was on, and they were revealing the Philly pride flag, this beautiful pride flag that has a black and brown stripe. And the way that hit my emotions, and I just sat there silently, like I just watched the TV and I didn't say anything because I couldn't, and no one else said anything either. So was it cool to them? Did they think that was great? Did they think it was awful? Who knows? But I certainly couldn't say, even though that flag means everything to me because it recognizes me as a human being and the struggles that I go through.
yeah, I just think some parents are surprised. They're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe you didn't think that it wouldn't be safe to tell me, or why did you think this?" And it's like, you never gave me reason to think otherwise. Like you have to
Yeah.
be at my growing up, like I had the opposite where they told me it wasn't okay. So that's why
Yeah.
I was hesitant. And
Yeah, and if there's
but
ambiguity, you're not going to, put yourself in danger. You're just not, because it doesn't feel safe to do that, you know? You don't know what you might lose by coming out, especially if it's just ambiguity. If you got no clear indicator one way or another, chances are you're not going to take that leap because you don't know what'll happen. So yeah, it's in those little details. I think people don't realize just how much the little jokes we make or the little ways in which we speak and all of those minute things start to add up. So if you're someone who's like trying to figure out, well, how do I be better, just think about the words you're using, think about the jokes you make, think about who might be affected by those words. Oh, but this is just normal, everyone talks like that, but that doesn't have to be. Nothing about our world has to be the way it is.
I think, me, I'm in my mid 30s. I've come a long way from where I was in, say, like, even my 20s, but I still do that thing that you described where it's not just a family thing. I walk into any room and I'm listening for
Mm-hmm.
any indication that if I'm too flamboyant, that they're going to treat me differently or like single me out or be
Yes.
uncomfortable because I don't want to make people. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I want people to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Hopefully, by the time I'm, whatever, I don't know what life event's going to happen where I'm just going to be like, great, it's me. I can walk into a room and they
Yeah.
can deal with it.
No,
But
everywhere you go, if it's a new job, if it's a
oh
new
yeah,
group of friends, if you're meeting someone for the first time, everything, you're analyzing everyone.
hmm,
Yeah, no, I very much, very, very much relate to that feeling.
I hope it gets better. I think it's not as bad as I've talked to a lot of more elder gays than me, where they're coming from a generation where it was illegal. Your physical safety could be in danger if the wrong people found out.
Mm-hmm.
Like you had to push yourself down to survive. That was a
Yeah.
survival instinct. Whereas I don't necessarily feel like anyone's gonna like physically attack me in like I don't put myself in those situations
Mm-hmm.
consciously, but
Mm-hmm.
I still get worried about like I don't want to put myself out there in a weird situation where I have to I don't know. I don't want to feel weird. Like it's not
Yeah.
I don't know.
You don't wanna deal with the social awkwardness. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I feel that. I, as a South Asian person, still fear physical violence, in certain
Mhm.
settings,
Yeah.
but, like, overall, like, in the work that I do and, I don't live at home anymore, so I've been more able to kind of just be myself. So, I put myself out there as queer in a lot of different places. It just so happens to be that in certain communities, in certain spaces, I kind of put that side of me away, and I don't talk about that stuff, you know? I will give the most circular answer possible and talk about something else. So yeah, it is definitely something that I think I want to be super clear is still an issue. We've come a long, long way, but in the world of people of color, it's not quite the same. We think we've come a long way and we haven't quite, and even literally today, there's news about Roe v. Wade being overturned. And that's not just a women's rights issue or a women's body issue, because being queer also includes being trans. It includes people that do not necessarily fit into gender norms or who do not identify with the gender of their body. So there are all kinds of people out there in the world who are affected by this decision one way or another, and that it has a lot of very deep rippling impacts. And I think I would be remiss in not mentioning that, just because it's literally on the forefront of everyone's minds right now. So I think what I'm trying to get at is you start to kind of see how so many different things kind of start to interplay. I know for a fact that I am in more physical danger because I'm South Asian. The way I'm perceived even on the street as a queer South Asian person, if I make that look too obvious, might put me in more danger of violence because I'm a woman. It just is the nature of things. And it doesn't have to be that way, but that's how society at the moment works. I'm a woman, therefore I have to deal with being safe. I'm a queer woman. If I come out about being queer, is that going to put me in more danger? Am I going to have to worry about, the results of what happens if I get put in a dangerous situation. All of these things start to all tangle together. But I'm always thankful and grateful for the progress that we have made, because it's been lovely. I moved into this place and my roommates were like, "What are your pronouns, by the way?" And that was such a lovely feeling to just be like, "Oh, my pronouns are she, her," you know? And the fact that even though they're not necessarily queer or, anything like that, they were wanting to make sure that they were doing right by me. They wanted to make sure that they knew what my pronouns were and that they knew how to best support me. Um, and that's all I think any of us are asking for, really.
Yeah, I don't think most people realize, unless you're like aware of it, that like trans women of color are like, I don't know, it's a staggering number. I don't have the
Yep.
official like report for you, but it's like 30% plus that you're gonna walk outside your door and be assaulted or murdered for existing. Like,
Yep. Yep. It's very much a thing where the more sort of like margins of the more marginalizations and different kind of like layers you add on, the rougher your chances are, really. And this is a topic called intersectionality, which is what my entire life is about. So that's why I'm kind of also bringing this up, is because it's such an important part of a lot of the work that I do and that I teach, is about kind of pointing out the fact that, hey, if you're all of these things, you might have a harder time than, sorry, the white gay. No offense. If I am a person with a visible disability and I'm also queer and also a person of color, that's a very different situation. And the way that I'm going to be treated is going to be very different from me as a person that I am right now, who is walking down the street like a normal human being, you know? So yes, if you think that everyone has it the same, I encourage you to do a little bit of Googling, because there are some really staggering numbers and some really just sad reports of how untrue that is and just how different people's lives are affected by these things.
I think we still get the comment of, oh, you have marriage equality, therefore we solved it. Like there is
Yeah.
no
No,
we did it. We did it,
no. We
everyone.
solved the gays.
We did it. We did. There's no more homophobia. Um
Yeah,
and
except
that's
that's not true.
no,
Just
it's
because
we're still
just because,
fighting for basic
Mhm.
human rights. Like we still are. Like marriage is great. It's kind of like the least of what we want in terms of wanting just to live as human beings.
Yes.
Um,
And it,
yeah.
it, it depends, if you're marrying someone with a disability, that's a very different ballgame
Mhm.
altogether. And marriage equality isn't all of it, just, oh, okay, we solved homophobia because marriage equality is now legal. You can now have this, but that doesn't change the subtle things that happen in our culture. Just because the overt and obvious stuff has been fixed does not, in fact, now that that is a thing, the homophobia that does exist has gone into hiding. It's all very
Mhm.
subtle. It's clouded behind something else. Oh, a gesture like this that actually means something else. So instead of overt, it's now covert. So there's still a lot of that, and there's still people that fear to come out to this day.
So you've mentioned your like studies in intersectional feminism.
Mhm.
Talk about how you're bringing your knowledge and experience into the tabletop industry.
Absolutely. That's my whole jam. I created a little business. It's just me, myself, and I, called Maple Intersectionality Consulting. And what I tend to do is, I think when we talk about things like DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, things like that, well, we think about like, oh, HR, right? That's something that the HR deals with at work, right? They do the thing. Sure, okay, but that's not where it stops. Diversity, equity, and inclusion means seeing ourselves in the world. So when you're making a tabletop game, you might want guidance on how best to do that. How can I make sure that everyone feels seen in this game that I'm created? And how can I make sure that the depictions that I'm doing are accurate? How can I make sure that I'm not just, I've created these fantasy races and there's a bunch of strife in this world, and it's going to be great because the players get to fight against all of these evils, and that's important. But how do I know that the evils that I've put in this world are okay? am I, have I created something where, a player at the table may feel like they are, experiencing a form of a phobia similar to homophobia or similar to racism? Are they going to, is that going to come up? And how do I either remove that if that is the creator's case, or because games that deal with tough subjects do exist, how can I best equip this game to have mitigation strategies to reduce the harm that happens? And I advise on all of that kind of stuff. So I am lucky enough that I get to work with cool people that are creating all kinds of games, and I get to look over their stuff and talk to them and guide them, and kind of point out all of those little things that they may not have realized, might not be quite right. And I get to go, hey, maybe we could just adjust this. Or did you know that this kind of reads that way? And we can kind of just tweak it just like this, and then all of a sudden you're not going to have this problem that might happen. So yeah, I've been really lucky in that I get to kind of shape really cool games into being even better than they already are, and make them an even more great experience for anyone at the table.
So how did you get involved in the tabletop hobby? Like what got you sucked into this?
I think I stumbled across a stream on Twitch. I think I had a friend who was like, I'm going to be on this stream on Twitch, and I stumbled across it, and I went, oh, this is kind of cool. And that was kind of what got me hooked. I was like, I really like, this idea of playing a tabletop game, but like it's on Twitch, and like there's all these people in the audience that are going to like chit chat with you and hang out. So that was how I started. I started out online playing virtually, stream games and things like that. And I just realized that it was a lot of fun. I really loved Vampire the Masquerade. I really loved a bunch of indie tabletop games that I got to, explore and discover and play. And I've been lucky enough to try a bunch of different tabletop games at this point. And there's so many that I adore because I just think they're so much fun. I think my first ever game was a one shot of Honey Heist. And I just remember laughing until I cried because it was just the most ridiculous, chaotic thing that was just, it was just so much fun. It was just all of this acting and role play and chaos, and I loved it. And that was what kind of got me into the hobby. And as I kind of stuck around in the hobby, I was like, well, I kind of want to see this world grow for the better. And I think I had seen like somebody put out something that was very racist towards South Asian people. And I just got fed up, and I said, all right, well, if nobody else is going to do it, I guess I'll do it myself. And I created my own business. And that was kind of how I did that. But for a while, it was just someone who is, a hobbyist who is just playing to have fun and just kind of connecting with the community. And then, then I started getting into home games. And I feel like I kind of got into the tabletop hobby in a very backwards way for most people. I didn't, discover it at my local game store because I didn't feel like that was approachable for me. I didn't really feel like, I was, as a girl, I always felt kind of like, oh, there's a lot of white guys in here. I don't know if I really want to go in there and start asking about Dungeons and Dragons just because I've heard of it and I don't know what it is. And I feel like they're going to start explaining it to me and my brain's going to shut off halfway through because I don't understand what any of this means. So yeah, it was through the internet and through Discord and, just communities and servers that were willing to teach and welcome me and have a good time. And yeah, it's been fun.
That's a really interesting point that very unique from like what I've heard so far. But it's really cool that that platform has helped, like giving people a platform on the platform to create those like very specific safe spaces for you can really find like your specific community where you feel very safe, and you can branch out from there. But it's a really cool way, if you're open to it, to get involved in a community and have support and people who are it's moderated, if you're doing it right.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing it right, it's moderated. It's very much a safe space. And, there's people that are willing to, to teach you and guide you and, or they'll invite you to their games. And I'll be like, well, I don't know how to play this game. I'm like, that's okay. We'll teach you as you go. People that are just willing to be welcoming and make it slightly less intimidating and overwhelming, because I still find tabletop RPGs intimidating and overwhelming. I still don't know what I'm doing when I'm playing D&D. Like, what is that word? What does that mean? I don't know. I've been doing this for a couple of years and I still don't understand what I'm doing. So yeah, no, I really love the community aspect. I really loved just engaging with people, and there's some really cool I think, groups and communities within the tabletop space that are just doing really cool things, and it's just nice to hang out with them.
Yeah, one thing I'm gonna miss about doing like having more people involved in the online playtesting process and stuff is it was so nice just to see people with like you have to use pronouns and like we're going to be
Mhm.
inclusive and it was moderated and people had this pressure to be open-minded and inclusive and it like created a really fun
Mhm.
uh like positive experience for me in the pandemic to get
Absolutely.
into board game design and you find all these discord groups and like there's so many like good
Mhm.
welcoming communities out there. And
Yeah.
I think to your point, like what you said, like as a marginalized person, I don't walk into a room and feel super comfortable just sitting down at a table with someone, like a group of
Mhm.
strangers. If I do that, I have to do that thing we talked about where I have to suss out whether or not I'm welcome there and like what level of myself I can comfortably be in front of
Mhm.
them. Like I'm
Absolutely.
doing that while also trying to like learn a game and or teach a game and give feedback. So
Mhm.
um I really appreciated the online aspect of the pandemic. I hope a lot of those the whatever was developed that they carry over into real life of
Oh, fair enough.
I think it started to bleed into like Gen Con where they were
Really?
banning people or being very like they had very clear written things on the doors of like this is a welcoming space. If you walk in here, we don't tolerate like this specific kind of behavior. So
Mhm. Yeah, and it's it's nice to have spaces like that because everyone just wants to feel welcome and included. And even if you're someone who's like, oh, I don't know too much about LGBTQ stuff, but you're in an LGBTQ Discord server. There's people, not everyone, because no one is going to like hold your hand through the whole process. But there are some people that are more willing to just kind of like talk to you and explain stuff to you. So like it was just a really neat way to also like meet other people from other trains of thought and other walks of life and like learn about things that I otherwise never would have learned about. There's tabletop RPG podcasts. I had no clue what that universe looked like until very recently. And now I'm in podcasts. There's people doing streams and there's people willing to teach you how to stream. And it's just a really cool space. And I love that Gen Con is now starting to do that kind of stuff where it's like, hey, we need to be respectful. Just don't be mean to people. Just be a nice person.
I think a lot of them are like they just have to be they're being forced to be very upfront about their
Mhm.
policies like here's what we're going in like here's our mindset that we're going in for
Yeah,
there's probably some argument of how effective they are at enforcing
for sure.
those
Yeah. But
policies
it's a
but
step though.
it's there. I think most people I've talked to do a lot of like board game specific stuff. What are some things that you would recommend for people since you seem to do more like TTRPG stuff, which is
Mhm.
tabletop role playing games? What are some role playing games that you would recommend to people who are like have never done it? Like you met similar situation probably where like oh D&D that seems intimidating and
Yeah.
it can be. I will tell you like I don't care because I'm a super nerd and I read the whole thing and I was like, oh, this sounds great.
Yeah, no, for sure. I do tend to do more tabletop RPG stuff. I've definitely done some board game stuff. I was lucky enough to work with Fantasy Flight Games on one of the Arkham Horror board games. So I love my board games. I grew up playing board games and they still hold a very special place in my life. So it just kind of happens that I ended up kind of more so in the tabletop RPG world just by chance, just per chance. But D&D is incredibly popular and incredibly famous, so a lot of people will find it a lot easier to find a D&D game and table to get started at. So even though I don't personally recommend it, I have to say try D&D, you know. But there are many, many, many other games out there. There's a lot of simpler games that are a little bit easier. Anything that says powered by the apocalypse or PBTA, such as a game called Masks, is a game that just uses d6s, so regular six-sided die that you can usually find in your board games, and you don't need those weird d20s and all those other hexagonals and goodness gracious whether the shapes they are. I still don't know. But you can find games that are simpler. They just have those d6s, and Mask, for example, is a superhero game. And so you just get to be this really cool teenage superhero, and see what that life is like. So you might want to start with something like that. I mean, at the end of the day, it kind of really depends on what kind of experience you want to. I'm very much someone who is looking for games that are easy to learn and that you can roll dice. Some people want, very realistic games, or they want the wargaming aspect where you've got your minis on the map and you're moving them around, you're figuring out all these little details. So it depends. There's a tabletop game for everyone. There's literally any kind of game that you want. It exists. If you want something that's like a telenovela, there's something like that. If you want, there's all kinds. I've played far too many to even remember them all at this point. Do you want Star Wars? We've got Star Wars. We've got everything. I think if you can find a friend, who kind of knows a little more, can kind of guide you into it, or contact me on Twitter. I'm happy to help out. Anytime. I'm always happy to help people that are like, help, I want to do the thing, but I don't know how to do the thing. Don't worry, we'll help you. But yeah, also if you're kind of like, I want to know more about these games, Twitch is a really cool place because you can watch people actually playing these games in real time, and you can see what they look like. YouTube definitely has a bunch of videos that like explain things. So if you're like looking for like an explainer video, you can find a bunch of that kind of stuff. So I encourage you to use the internet, because the entirety of my tabletop life has been on the internet.
Yeah, that's pretty cool that we've gotten to a point where we have like those online platforms that allows us to play together just as effectively, if not more effectively, than we can in real life sometimes.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. I know one of my game masters loves ensuring that he has the right kind of music or like sound effects to really like set the scene, and like he's always kind of tinkering with those. And then you have platforms like Roll20 where you can roll dice and have your maps, and it's incredibly effective to use for all kinds of different games. And D&D Beyond, which is just an easy way to make a D&D character sheet, and that's why I don't know half of what I'm doing, because I rely on D&D Beyond exclusively, because otherwise I wouldn't know how to put together a character sheet, period. So yeah, there's lots of really cool resources out there. And there are stream games, there are offline games, there's online games that are non-stream, so you can have a bunch of different kinds of experiences. But I personally recommend finding a Discord community, and starting there, because then you get to make some friends along the way, and then they're willing to teach you stuff, and it's a good time.
Yeah, I haven't played a ton. I mostly play D&D with, I'm in like 2 D&D groups right now. Yeah, and we've had success pulling in people who were like interested, had never played before. But yeah, you gotta have to give them a character, a sheet, and they can play it however they want. I mean, your sheet is really more just like your stats. It's like it just tells you what dice to roll. You bring like you can bring your character to it. Yeah.
It's your sheet is like your toolkit. And yeah, there's, like I said, all kinds of games. There's Vampire the Masquerade, Call of Cthulhu, there's Warhammer, there's Warhammer 40K, I think is what it's called. There's so many. There's something for everyone. Fantasy Age, 7th Sea, Scum and Villainy. These are a bunch of the ones that I've played that I'm certainly now starting to like list off.
One of my favorite ones that I'm forcing my friends to play with me, because I like had it prepared and never got to it, is we did a game of Dread. Do you know what that is?
I haven't played that one yet. No,
so it's an RPG. It's a horror RPG. So it's always like a scary, suspenseful scenario. And you don't have dice. You have a Jenga tower. So whenever you have like a character background that you write up, you're like, ooh, here's who my character is. And it's like very like proby, like what's your biggest fear? Like what happened to you that traumatized you? I don't know. It's like stuff like that.
That's so cool.
And then whenever you have to do something that is like challenging, or either physically or emotionally challenging for your character, and depending on how challenging it is for your character, you have to pull blocks off the tower. And whenever someone pulls a block and it falls, your character dies. So you're all trying to survive the scenario without dying.
fascinating. Oh, that's such a cool way of doing things. Honestly, there's so many neat tabletop RPGs out there. You can find all kinds. Even like itch.io, there's so many that are just made by people that are just really, really neat experiences. You know, you can roll dice or use Jenga towers or candles or playing cards. It's really like there's so many different games out there, and there's so many like experiences. Like you can have a goofy game like Honey Heist, or you can have something like Our Queen Crumbles or Dialect, where it's going to be very, very sad, and you know that it's going to be a sad game, but the experience that you have is very beautiful. Or a horror game, you know. So there's literally everything under the sun, which is, I think, what's so cool about tabletop RPGs is you can have this experience and role play out different things, and it's just neat.
I think people get intimidated by like the role playing aspect of it. And I think it's
Mm,
just because it's a muscle they've never exercised. Of that
for
muscle of
sure.
just like say stuff and just like
It's yeah,
be okay with it.
it's like acting, you know?
It
It's
is,
like
yeah.
flexing and acting. It's like acting or like playing pretend. Like really, that's all it is. And
It's just
if
playing
it's
pretend.
yeah, and if it's been a long time since you've played pretend, it's okay to feel weird about that, you know, with the bunch of people. But I think especially with goofy games, because then you can really kind of get into it and get loose and get silly with it, and you know, you can really kind of go all out with it and just kind of embrace it, you know. But it's for me, that is my favorite aspect of tabletop RPGs is the role play, because I think that's what creates those beautiful stories that stick with people. You know, there's been games that I've been in where I'm just like, someday I'm going to convention and I'm going to meet each and every one of you, and I'm going to give you the biggest hug ever because we just experienced the most emotional journey together, and it was beautiful. It was such a great time, and I'm so grateful that I got to do it with these people. And someday I'm going to give you a bear hug because I wish I could have given you a bear hug all of the times that I saw you get emotional over the course of this
Mm.
game. So there.
Yeah. I think the secret sauce to it, though, for a lot of systems and to keep an eye out for is having an experienced DM, if there is a DM or whoever's running the
Mhm.
game. Like you want
Yeah.
someone who knows how to foster
Mhm. Yeah.
those like experimental sides of you. Like when you're saying something and you don't know, you're like, oh, this is probably dumb. They're like, no, we're gonna run with it. And they make
Absolutely.
you like you do need to have someone who's secure enough to let the people at the table have a good time and
Mhm. For
foster
sure.
that good
Yeah.
time. So if you've tried it and you didn't like it at all, it might have been that you just didn't have like the
Mhm.
best person in charge. Like they were probably insecure or figuring it out still, or they wanted
Or
it to go a very
yeah.
certain way and you weren't doing it. And then
Yeah, or you just have a mix up at your table. You know, I've definitely been
yeah.
at tabletop RPG like tables that I've just been like, hey, you know what? This just isn't quite the best fit for me. I'm
Hmm.
someone who is very heavy into the role playing, and I'm not worried about how many torches I have because I'm an adventurer. Why would I run out of torches? You know, unless it was extremely relevant, I don't care about the details, and that will drive some people batshit. You know, there are some people who will absolutely not be able to stand that, and they will need to know how many torches they have at all times. And those are just different play styles, right? There's some people that really like go loosey goosey with the rules, and there's some people that live and die by the rules, and that's okay. So sometimes and I think that can happen with board games too. So sometimes it's about
Hmm.
finding people with similar play styles and things like that, and just having someone that kind of knows the game, very similar to board games, right? If someone knows the game, it's a little bit easier, and it'll be easier for y'all to figure it out together.
Yeah, I think the more different your play styles, that person in charge becomes more important. Like
Yes.
you need to know how do I
Yeah.
make a good experience for my loosey goosey character, which is absolutely me, and the person who is counting the rocks, the
Yep.
weight of the
Yep.
rocks in their bag.
Yep.
And you got to find a balance. Like you can have a good time. It's
You
just
can.
it takes
Absolutely.
some work. Yeah,
It does. It definitely takes some work, and I've definitely been at tables where I've been able to make it work, and then I've also had the luxury of being like, hey, I think I'm okay. Y'all have a great time.
yeah, and
Um,
that's totally fine too.
mhm. Yeah. It doesn't. Not every table is going to be a fit for everyone, and that is okay. We all want to tell different kinds of stories.
What is your pulse of like the tabletop industry right now? Give me the difference of what do you see where you see areas where the hobby can improve, and what are areas that you see improvement being made that gives you hope?
I feel like I have seen. And this is kind of a commentary that I make for the tabletop industry, for the board game industry, and the video game industry, and I kind of lump them
Mm,
all when I talk about industry stuff,
mm,
because I think the three industries are so intertwined in some ways. I think we are seeing this surge of like video game inspired media. You know, you think about like League of Legends and Arcane as a show, and then you have video games that get inspired by tabletop RPG games or inspired by board games, and so they all kind of like have this way in which they kind of like feed off of each other and click together. So I talk about them all kind of. I get a lot of hope when larger tabletop RPG publishers, especially. I love it whenever my indie and smaller creators come to me because I know that they want to do good, and it's a joy. But when you have a game that is very well known by lots and lots of people, and there are lots and lots of people, especially, you know, some very opinionated loud white folks that say, it's this way, it has to be this way, you know. And when those companies that design those games, despite the voices in their fandoms that are very loud and adamant that it has to be this way, when they kind of sit down with you and go, okay, we want to do this right, we want to make this right, what do we do, you know, that willingness to be uncomfortable and to recognize that your game might be about to be torn apart a little bit, you know? And I cannot talk about it because it has not been published yet, but I was so grateful when someone sat down with me and was like, "Hey, we recognize that previous versions of this game have been awful, and
mhm.
we're going to fix that. So, we're going to rip it apart and you're going to rip it apart and we're going to make it into something better," you know? And I am always keen to work with my clients and be like, all right, let's negotiate. You know, is this something that you need to have in there, or can we get rid of this? You know, if we have to keep it in there, can we position it this way? You know, so I love when people are so willing to just listen and to make changes and to just be like, all right, okay, let's try this. I think the biggest thing that still needs to happen is I think people just need to learn. You know, it's a game that a lot of people like. Tabletop RPGs and games are just things that people are passionate about, and they it's a comfort for them, right? And they don't want to see things through someone else's perspective. Someone created Mustang's art at Mustang's art on Twitter, created a D&D combat wheelchair, and I thought it was really, really cool. And they deal near daily with people who have issues with this wheelchair, with this combat wheelchair, even though like famous people like Critical Role have used it, and they're just like, no, this is unacceptable, you wouldn't have this in a dungeon, how dare you? Or but what if you could just set it aflame? Like, oh well, what if you could just do this? And you know, I think when the world just moves a little smoother when we have empathy for people, or we're just willing to just listen and learn and just like be open to their side of things, you know, when people are willing to empathize with the other person and go, oh, okay, it doesn't always have to be this way. And hey, you want to play that way? That's cool. It's not for me, but maybe you go do you over there. I think those types of things matter. I think when people are willing to have conversations about why orcs are actually, in fact, racist. That's something that seems to come up at least once a month on tabletop RPG Twitter. Orcs are racist? What? Why? You know, and then we have the whole conversation over and over again. And people are always pushing back. They're like, well, Tolkien said this, or somebody said this, and but this is how it was in original D&D. But okay, but what if you just hear us out for a second? So I think there's still a lot of like conversations and learning that still need to happen and that are going to continue to happen daily. But the more people that are willing to, you know, go to a cultural consultant when they're creating their game, or, you know, go to someone who can help them with their game, or, you know, I've even had DMs approach me. They're like, hey, I'm running this game for my table, and I just want to make sure that, you know, I'm doing this right. And I'm like, you're phenomenal that you really, you know, you're so intensely concerned about your homebrew that you want to double check in with me and make sure that you're doing right. Like, that's really cool. I think change is one of those things that happens on multiple levels. It has to happen on an individual level when an individual is willing to listen and learn, but also on a wider level. So when the bigger companies and organizations that kind of influence all of this kind of stuff are willing to also take those steps to make some changes and to listen and learn and do better, that's just as important. It has to happen on all fronts and all scales. So that's my long-winded way of saying that. Yeah, it's great when people do the things. We need more of it.
Yeah, and it's just this uphill battle of getting people to understand we're not looking to take away space from anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not bringing it up because we want to kick you out of the space or like prove you wrong. It's just we want to feel safe, and we have voices now, and we have platforms to be heard, and we just want to be heard.
Yeah, it's if you really want to be a fascist in this game, I guess find a table that works for you, because I don't think I want to be at your table. And we can have a conversation outside of the game about politics and all of that kind of stuff, but when it comes to the game, I just want to feel safe at my table. I just want to have a nice time. Some people do want to deal with that, and they want to be able to have those political conversations at their table. So maybe the next person you meet that is a queer woman of color will be like, actually, I'm down. Let's do this. But for me, I'm just like, maybe not today. The tabletop RPGs are my escape, where I get to pretend to be someone else who doesn't have to deal with all of this chaos and nonsense. So that's how that is. We just want to be safe and have a nice time.
I think to tie it back to our like kind of previous comments of we're always looking for those little things to indicate to us that it's not safe. So I think the more you learn and listen, the better you'll pick up ways to not only avoid those little things that make people feel unsafe, but you'll find ways to make them feel more safe. So
absolutely. Yeah. There's room for everyone at the table.
Why not?
Absolutely.
My last question, you've mentioned it throughout, but just so it's all condensed nicely and packaged in one place, how can people find you, support you? Where do we go? What do we do? Where do we send the check?
I think the best place for all of that is to search up my Twitter, which is at the Leona Maple. That is kind of my central hub. That's where all the information is. Do you want to email me? Great. You can find it. If you go to the link in my bio, you can find a thing that will let you send me a little email. Do you want to send me a check? Great. There's a PayPal in there too. You can send it there. So that's probably, I think, the best place to kind of know where I am and what I'm doing. I am Maple Intersectionality Consulting. I work with board games, tabletop games, video games, etc., etc., etc. I talk about all of that work on there. I will also sometimes do threads, kind of like digging into how I do my work and what that looks like. So you can find some really cool stuff there. I share a lot of, things that have to do with whatever's going on in the world. So there's always something really, really interesting. Also, lots of cute cats. I like sharing cats, so it's not all doom and gloom on my Twitter. I like sharing cute things too. And also the streams and podcasts that I'm on, because I do a lot of different tabletop RPG stuff. I'm lucky enough that I get to work with different people, and I get to be in different projects, and I get to play and share different games and stories with the world. So you can hear about and find out all of that kind of stuff all on that one place. So that is the best place to go to find everything.
To wrap this up, because that's all I have. So as a disclaimer at the end here, I just want to remind everyone that we're just a couple of queer folks. We do not speak for the entire LGBTQI plus community, nor are we trying to. The best way to be an ally is just to keep learning, listening, and remember, we're just trying to figure it out together. So that's all I have. If you're listening, know that you're loved and perfect just the way you are. And until next time.
Bye.